Welcome everybody. I'm Mark Fox, CEO of Net Events, and delighted to welcome press from throughout the Asia Pacific region here this afternoon. And chairing the session, selecting winning solutions to ensure successful, highly secure network transformation, we have Dustin Kehoe, Service Director of APAC and Middle East at Global Data. So Dustin, over to you to chair today's session.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Dustin Kehoe, and on my panel from left to right is Angus Look, CTO Smart Retail at Lenovo, Terrence McCabe, Chief Technology Officer, Asia Pacific and Japan, Nokia. There's Richard Christopher, Global Head of Network Services, Standard Chartered, and Andrew Yeong, VP and Head of Asia Pacific, Tata Communications. Thank you very much for joining this event. So today we're going to talk about transformation and really what we're seeing on the ground. I believe what we had witnessed, I'm going to start this conversation with data. I think data is always a good starting point. But the events in the past year, I think we'd all argue, not to be too cliche, has accelerated, but really put a lot of fire and urgency to what we call digital transformation. So what I did here is I took a database we have of 500,000, 500,000 profiles of customers and how they're spending on ICT services. And then what I did is I extracted that to Singapore. So I have roughly 3,000 accounts in Singapore, and their spending is about 128 billion. So I started to look at those accounts and see what's going on. And one thing right away is there is a dramatic increase of over 6% on IT this year in 2020 compared to 2009. We expect that trend to continue. We've never seen any dramatic increase in Singapore like that before. Usually IT is kind of flat, in the kind of the 5% range with a few outliers. We continue to see the line of business owning about half of the budget, and we continue to see about half of the priorities about changing the business, not running the business and keeping the lights on. Interestingly, this is a whole point of transformation in my talk today quickly, is we see the top investment areas because we do propensity modeling, and they are on networking, cloud and data center, and security. I will argue and present a point of view that they're becoming increasingly interlinked. The biggest growth areas are healthcare for ICT spending, consumer goods, and retail. This changes every year, but we hear a little bit back and forth about how spending is in decline. And these sectors in 2020 were not affected. We saw nothing but growth in ICT, and there's a bigger story behind that. If you can move to the next slide, please. So what's happening here? What we've done is we started to the left. There are the business drivers. What is the agenda that drives transformation? Well, you talk to the business, they want to move into an adjacent market. They want to improve operational efficiencies. For example, they want an IT system that's not going to tell them that a workflow that makes sense is not possible because it's not supported. So IT systems need to move out of legacy. They need to flatten. They probably need to go cloud native. They will tell you oftentimes we need to make employee experience transformative. And I'll give you one experience, China. There is something called live digital commerce. It's a $60 billion industry. And how this works, instead of me transacting and buying my shopping online, I actually enter a virtual room with celebrities, with famous people, and I ask them questions direct in a live environment. And they give me advice on the products that I'm interested in, phones or lipstick or whatever it may be. And this becomes a $60 billion business. It is the biggest growing live streaming industry in the market. This would not be possible without an amazing customer experience. That is high capacity video, low latency networks, and a lot going on in between to make this look and feel like real time. So what sits behind this? A platform that's cloud native. I'll talk a little bit about that later. We believe APIs are important for unlocking the vendor dependencies and promoting interoperability. A little bit around containers and microservices, the need for open source to differentiate, and changing the culture through DevOps. Yes, of course, there are challenges. Management of clouds, scaling the network, securing the network, performance, service management, you name it. These are just a few, but this is directionally where we're going. If you can move a little bit to the next slide. But here's another dynamic. IT cannot do this alone. Do you remember I said that half of your budget is changing the business and half of the budget comes from the line of business? If you want to do anything, and this is just a banking example, you have to engage these different personas. They are more important than ever before. Not only do these important personas are important, they need to work with each other to create a change management framework. Without that, you do not have transformation. We do not see digital transformation as an IT project. We see it as a collection of many projects, multiple projects and skill sets and capabilities you bestow on an organization so they can deliver their goods and services and bring them to market differently. That is why IT is increasingly interlinked, interdependent to business outcomes. And this is a typical scenario in a bank. If I want to change better ways of working, work from anywhere, probably need to engage the HR department. If I want to talk about digital branches, you probably need customer care and the branch manager, and so on and so forth. If we can move to the next slide, please. So this is the platform that's kind of sitting behind it all. It speaks to what's happening in the market. Units of compute, network, and storage are getting smaller and smaller, and we need to think of infrastructure as code. We write scalable applications without thinking of what sits beneath the hood. The idea here is we want speed and agility without compromising security and compliance. You move too fast, you get security breached. You move too slow, you've lost the pace. Your competitors have enveloped you, and you're losing market share, and your fickle customers in retail have gone elsewhere. There's a lot going on with the abstraction of appliances to virtual services. Our firewalls become instantiated on the infrastructure side. On the application modernization side, we have software as a service, containers, microservices, serverless compute. A whole another wave of transformation is happening on this side. That's kind of the underlying ingredients that's bringing us to this, driving this change. And we can do it because of virtualization. Next slide, please. But virtualization cannot go far and further enough without thinking of security. We see cloud and network evolving where they're actually going to be very interdependent. They're going to be, it's going to be very decentralized, but they're going to be very interdependent. Different types of networks, multi-service networks, will be running different sorts of cloud environments. And you're going to need not all networks for all clouds and vice versa. As we've talked about multi-service networks for years and years, we're also going to go from hybrid to multiple clouds. And underpinning all of this are the terms that we come across: CASB, SASE, identity and access management, data loss prevention, and governance, and various methodologies. If we can move a little bit to the next slide, please. So not only is this being abstracted, but so are networks. And in network connectivity, we might call it the overlay versus the underlay. An overlay person, an OTT SD-WAN type, might tell you that the network doesn't mean so much. We could put an intelligent box over the top and tell the workloads to do what we want it to do. We can go into the branch environments and do some really cool things. And centralized controllers can help you automate processes. The underlay people will tell you, wait, hold on a second. We'll still need network intelligence to do deterministic routing, to peer correctly, to manage third-party networks. And so the network can give the overlay some network intelligence so it can action them correctly and give you more resiliency. This is a little bit of the debate. Let's move to the next slide. The truth is down the middle. There are good things for overlay. There are great things for underlay. But I believe personally that if you want to get into data-driven networks and self-healing and self-learning and redundancy and capacity planning, you're going to need both approaches. And this is going to be very important when you think of how you architect your infrastructure for the current environment, for the permanence of, work from anywhere. Next slide, please. But there's a lot more happening too. There's the 5G element, and what 5G is bringing a new dynamic to underlay. It talks about things like dimensioning the network and doing it in such a way where every single workload on the network has its own parameters for quality of service, class of service, latency, and security dynamics. But then 5G and this underlay drives compute and edge compute. What that means is we no longer think of cloud as a centralized location, but it's something very close, operating next to your workloads, bringing you cost savings and better response times and data optimization. So there's a lot going on, how networks really play off cloud, and how while edge brings more decentralization of IT, it also brings network, cloud, and security together and tighter and converged in a different sort of way. If we can move to the next slide. So here are some workloads we see with low latency, what edge could bring, from the things that really require, sub-milliseconds to things to do with IoT. Customers like it because it drives IoT and densification. It brings interesting security conversations to the fore, but it also means you can do a lot of stuff on site without having to transfer things all the way back to the cloud. And this brings compliance benefits. It also reduces hairpinning and the old trombone effect. We move to the next slide. And so you also have to do one additional thing. As you're trying to move fast and do all these things of speed and agility, we need to think of cloud as a platform where we platform on containers and microservices and serverless compute. We think of low code, no code development. So our people, our employees, 80% of our employees can kind of build their own code through drag and drop functionality, bring a lot towards automation, and really bring this to scale, this virtualization and automation and intelligent automation. And we believe hyperscalers and traditional vendors will play an important role. One more slide. But none of this will be possible without security. And when we get into things like SASE, SASE basically takes the traditional constructs of security with identity access management and new approaches like zero trust architecture and gives us a framework so we can do cloud, network, and security for a remote and distributed workforce that where every individual person, everyone on this bridge is an endpoint, is a firewall. And that's how we sort of do it securely. Without further ado, I'm going to go back and conclude this and start to bring in the panelists. Discussion one is, if you've digested all that, I'll talk fast rather. The transformation imperative is what we're going to talk about in this 15-minute track. And what is driving your network strategy? If I can quickly stop here and ask Angus, then Terence, then Richard, and Andrew to introduce themselves for 1 minute before passing to the next person.
Sure. Thanks, Destin. Hi, everyone. I'm the CTO for Smart Retail in Lenovo. My scope is focusing on Global 500 customer in retail sector for what they need from technology, solution, and service perspective. We can provide a total solution for them from very much a technology offering. A little bit of my background, I work in retail over 15 years. Right before Lenovo, I worked in L'Oreal Group as a South APAC CIO. Before L'Oreal, and I work in the fashion apparel, Calvin Klein Tommy Hilfiger Group, to manage the region IT. And very, very happy to meet everyone online here and to share some of my perspectives.
Thank you. Terence McCabe here. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Asia Pacific and Japan in Nokia. Working with Nokia's carrier, enterprise, and web scale customers to share our vision of the importance of critical networks and how the evolution of critical networks shapes our world today. Economic development, the management of the environment, and indeed dealing with the crises that we seem to be facing at the moment. My own background, I've been in telecommunications for many years before Nokia. I worked at Mitel and Mavenir, two companies who worked in different areas of the telecommunications sphere, but always looking at the intersection between IT technologies and telecommunication technologies and how telecommunications can benefit and change by incorporating the learnings of faster moving areas of the IT world and sphere. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Richard Christopher. I'm the Global Head of Networks at Standard Chartered Bank. I joined the bank and moved to Singapore around 4 years ago, recruited to raise the bar of network services in the bank, to define and deliver a network transformation and to make us a world-class network function that could support the bank and its business and its customers in its planned journey for the future.
Andrew?
Hi, everyone. My name is Andrew. I'm the VP and Head of Asia Pacific for Tata Communications. We serve top 300 of the Fortune 500 companies as a digital infrastructure provider. So I've joined Tata for 4 years, similar to Richard, 4 years. We actually had the tremendous growth over these 4 years, in addressing the huge change that's happened, right? So just to share with you my background, I worked for 20 over years for US companies before I joined Tata. I used to work for IBM and Oracle. So happy to see you guys today.
Thank you. So in this discussion, Andrew, I think a lot of this is going to play really nicely with probably what you're seeing in the market with regard to Tata Communications. We talked about network underlay and overlay. I know that you do both of those things. I know that you're no stranger with the work from home and the challenges in the corporate WAN. From your perspective, what are some of the trends that you're seeing with regard to network transformation?
Thank you, Justin.
And what your customers are saying too.
Thank you, Justin. Just let me kick off today's panel discussion. Really pleased to meet everyone to offer some point of view here. As we all know, COVID has really accelerated the digitization needs in both the consumer and the corporate sectors. We see an increasing, from our side, we see an increasing use of ever-changing work from home tools. We see increase in cloud to cloud data communication increase. We see a huge clamor for the end mile what we call the last mile remote access, bandwidth access. So we have work from home users working at the ISPs trying to get connected to the cloud or connected to the applications. All this would need speed, accessibility, mobility, at the same time, what's really changing as we speak is really the security component as well, right? So the broader three trends that we are actually looking at, and Tata is really looking into these areas together with our customers, are the traditional areas where we're now moving to the new areas, right? So how are we going to move from our traditional remote VPN access to the corporate networks in the past to moving faster using, or more secure using, SASE and ZTNA technologies? How do we get the users to be seamless, right? And as if they're working away from the corporate office. The second, big item that we are looking at is really the customer experience that's built on top of that. So we do not want, the experience to be, subpar. We have customers, banks, manufacturers, they demand, the highest, service levels and quality from us. And they want it omni-channel, and they want it to be like ever presence, right? So, anytime, anywhere. And the third area is, all this has to be done in a very agile, responsive fashion. So whatever applications we build, whatever, design of our platforms that we build, we have to make them agile. We have to make it, self-service in certain extent. So, our view, right, just to sum up, is that we have an increasing need to design security in every part of our product line, right? So be it the platform, the product, or the service. We see that being asked by our customers within the Asia Pacific region, and some of our customers today, in pursuing the agility, and responsiveness, they are lacking in maybe skills or maybe knowledge, and that's where Tata Communications is trying to fill the void. We are helping our customers. We are hearing our customers well. How do we have a single pane of glass, for example, across network, across security, across cloud, and provide what we truly believe in seamless communications for them. Back to you, Dustin.
Thank you. And Richard, I'm sure from where you sit, you must see a lot of what Andrew is discussing. What are some of the challenges or opportunities are you seeing with regard to network, especially for such a well-known, prominent bank?
Sure. I mean, lots of things that Andrew said there really resonate with me as well. And actually, Andrew and I do work together on a number of the initiatives for the bank. And If you think if you think that the role of a bank really is to deposit money and transfer money, so really the network and the availability of the network is of paramount importance to that. And now the expectation is the network is frictionless. Its presence should never be felt, and it does need the scalability, resiliency, and the security to make it to deliver that the bank's digital agenda and the bank's future strategy. So I think that the importance of the network has never been more so, and I think now that cloud is there. Clouds need to be, or cloud environments need to be, an integral part of your global network solution. So you have to leverage technologies such as SD-WAN, etc., so that your cloud is an integrated part of your global network and not just a bolt-on on the outside, especially when you move towards a multi-CSP solution. And let's not forget about cyber at the same time. So the role of the network is changing more so to be not just the transport, but also a means to provide cyber risk reduction and protection of those critical assets. And the network, the telemetry in the network, and the new capability coming to the network really does offer a compelling advantage to the cyber plan of an organization. Back to you, Dustin.
Thank you, Richard. And maybe a follow-up question, if I may. We mentioned in the presentation about speed and agility versus compliant and secure. And a bank, I mean, you're very compliant. You seem to have more compliance measures coming on every year, and likewise, you're the target of the biggest criminal gangs. I mean, the banking sector I'm speaking of. But on the speed and agility side, there's lots of fintech, and there's lots of disruption happening in your sector. Do you see this kind of trade-off, or are you seeing another kind of trade-off with where you sit?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question, and I think what you're hitting on there is the absolute balance of all of those things in the right combination. So, the business will always want to go fast. The regulators always want to keep you safe. So you have to strike that balance between, how do you bring products to market? How do you penetrate and explore new markets? But how do you also satisfy your regulators and keep your products secure? And that's where the bank spends a huge amounts of time and effort to making sure that we are compliant. That we make sure that when we, explore new products and markets, that we are keeping data safe, that we are following the regulations, and that we are using, the evolving security technology that's emerging out there to, continuously improve the security posture that we're able to offer.
I like that dynamic, fast but safe. Before we move to the next question, are there any more comments from Angus or Terence, or I can move us to the second section? We're good for time.
I would, I agree with the comments made today, but I'd also add to it that we have seen that many of the security threats that we face, and many of the infrastructural issues that have arisen recently, don't necessarily come about in cloudified or agile environments. That static environments and unimproved environments are often the most at risk. Social engineering is a key part of any cybersecurity threat, and we see that that's been an unending battle. So continuing to invest and evolve, you're working against a continuously changing set of threats. So it's important that your defenses are changing in a similar manner and are using the best available technology and methodologies. If you look at AI for threat detection as an example, that's evolving incredibly quickly, and anyone who isn't using that is leaving themselves exposed as a result. So I don't think it's a choice necessarily in all cases between agility and security. Agility can contribute to security, and we should look at it in that way. Yes, we need to be careful, but not so careful that we allow threats to go undefended.
Yeah, fair comment. And yeah, AI takes a lot of credit for, especially the unknown unknowns, the things you don't know that are there, or correlating or finding relationships between two disparate data sets, and probably reducing your dwell times too. I mean, there's a lot of benefits we're seeing for sure.
Justin, what I want to add on is like probably
sure.
What we see. This actually is not talking about one business sector, right? It's not talking about only financial, insurance. We see all this like I think the COVID impacts actually affect everyone. And a lot of industry, like even in the old days, we don't see that much of like right now, remote consultation of medical needs, right? Is like from the industry perspective, education as well. All this actually is being affected. And it is really a major transformation that we see in different areas that is really increasing needs of this type of security concern, network concern, all these kind of things that actually right now is a top priority for many of us. And I think this is very much important that all the organizations need to pay attention to
it. I can't agree with you more. I know if we're going to be pressed for time, but I completely agree. Hospitals were rather slow to adopt technology. We can definitely argue, and this, online learning, distant learning, didn't really get that impetus until it really had to. But now we're talking about it being very permanent. We're always going to learn in the classroom and remotely, it seems. So we'll move on to the next track, which is a similar track. It's still about life and in the cloud era. Networking in the cloud era, is life getting easier or harder? Is this discussion track? So I will start with with either Terence or Angus, but I wanted to hear both your perspectives. What do you see in the opportunities in cloud and edge compute? And while you're at it, you can please throw in 5G some more.
It's easy. It's easy to look at edge and 5G from a strict evolution of the mobile networks, but really the way we see 5G impacting networking as a whole, it really is a very large step beyond what we've seen with previous generations of mobile network. And we really, the first iteration of 5G release, it doesn't do anything more than enhance the broadband experience. But as the 5G network expands and becomes what it promises to be, it gives us a network that is sliceable, that can have dedicated quality of service and dedicated security domains associated with specific applications, with specific use cases. We see a real synergy between what's been going on in deployment of private networks and what's possible with slicing public networks. So you find that perhaps in a manufacturing plant or in a warehouse, you deploy private networking technologies to support your automation needs. But as the workload moves out of that controlled environment, it may move into an environment where the wide area you use a slice of a public network. These technologies, these capabilities, we really haven't seen yet be commercialized and made available, but the end-to-end use cases are already being developed. And there's some tremendous opportunities there, not just for the digitization and transformation of what we would traditionally see as IT-led industries, but of physical industries. When you see a workplace where the enhancement of the worker's environment, their safety, their productivity can be transformed dramatically, I think those are the places where we're going to see some huge changes in industries over the coming 5 to 10 years, because that's how long it will take in reality to take it from consumer-based massive broadband to the future that lies beyond. Perhaps I'll let Angus talk about edge a little, and we can compare notes.
Sure. Thanks, Terence. And then probably many of you know, like Lenovo, we have 5G's involvement as well, because we have a Motorola divisions that is under Lenovo, and we also we are PC manufacturer, and we try to adopt a lot of 5G connectivity in our device as well. And I think what we see is that definitely is as what Terence mentions, the 5G is very much a very purpose-built private network, which is very useful for, say, for example, in retail. And I think there are a lot of evolution that we would see in coming years. And on top of that, I think if we talk about edge compute, I think from edge compute perspective, I think we see a lot of technology transformation in coming years. And we see a lot of company actually start looking at it. And I think mainly because of three major reasons. Number one, I think all we are looking at is very much how we can provide a much more stable environments for the location, which is, say, for example, in the retail world, is a store level, right? It's a store level, how we make sure that the system's availability is always on, right? This is important, even when we talk about a lot of cloud evolutions, a lot of consideration how to protect the basics, right? And then number two is really efficiency. A lot of application, a lot of routines that you actually don't really need to run through all the way to the cloud, and it's much more efficient to run locally. And that's where I think we see a lot of edge compute needs from that perspective. The last piece is very much important, the data compliance. And then we see a lot of these needs in different countries. I think we all know like GDPR from Europe. Even when we talk about APAC, a lot of countries, they have their own regulatory requirements that you need to put the data into the country. And that's where we see a lot of regulatory need that you need to look at it differently. Like, I think this is where we see it will be very much a hybrid architecture, which is edge compute is really fitting a right way into the whole design of the network.
I think a key thing here is taking the simplicity of the global cloud and the value that the cloud providers have generated in having their software platforms as a basis for application development, and allowing that to be deployed locally, allowing that to be deployed at a country or even on a private basis within an enterprise. So you can build an application once and deploy it globally, deploy it locally, deploy it regionally. That's the real power of the model. And it is an opportunity that I think some of the mobile operators are seeing, because the way you're building 5G networks creates a need for edge data centers. And those edge data centers can be very effective locations for local breakout to these global cloud providers. So you're seeing, I know in Canada, both Bell Canada and TELUS Mobility have announced deals with AWS and Google. And we're seeing similar sorts of relationships where the web scale players are partnering with 5G network providers to create these landing spots close to the end user.
I also liked your point, Terence, around building once and deploying anywhere. Potentially, this is something you can do with edge. And what I'm talking about in Angus's environment is, imagine if you can upload your SD-WAN and all of your instances and all of your storage and compute needs, and just stick that device, maybe on site or near site, or, it gives you a lot of flexibility. I think it kind of opens up that use case for the infrastructureless branch. And that would also be very relevant to Richard. And I could see that being relevant to Andrew, because you've been very good, Andrew, at Tata Communications being in the WAN environment, but this is a good way to shake up the local area network and to help your customers reduce their infrastructure and their footprint. So it's great all around. Is anyone thinking of platforming to the cloud and containers and microservices, or is that too? Are we still too early for that?
I see there's an interesting thing going on here where the carriers themselves are trying to adopt, and some of them have moved quite aggressively to adopt that platform approach so that they can expose the assets of the network in a controllable and monetizable way to be, to be consumed. Interestingly, those APIs for consumption may well end up being hyperscalers APIs, but it is how do you create that usable, consumable network in a way that your enterprise applications can leverage all of the new value you're bringing in, and you're investing huge amounts of money in building. And that's a journey that's begun, and you're seeing with people, like Rakuten or with Dish Networks, a real move towards that network as a service, containerization, microservice model within the network and exposed outwardly towards consumers of that network.
Yep. And you mentioned Dish. I've heard of some hyperscalers talking to some telcos about potentially putting some of the core features of core infrastructure inside of a cloud environment, see what happens. Networks then become completely programmable, right?
Yeah, and the RAN is also, there's work going on to put the radio area network itself running in that environment. And that's a huge step change. But that ability to break that global cloud down into manageable, secure edge cloud environments means it's not as scary a concept as it might seem to some people.
Okay. And before we move on, is there any questions on, anyone want to raise anything on SASE or the security challenge? I mean, I know we touched on it before, but is SASE the right architecture, or we need to think of something else?
Dustin, can I chip in?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I think just want to touch on the point on, you're absolutely right. The telcos are, looking at, ways to serve their customers better, a lot more better. Mm-hmm. One of the, new initiatives that we have, example, will be really shipping out some form of low-cost CPE that allows, for pop-up stores, right? A pop-up network. We see that being a lot more agile. We are doing this for, a luxury brand, that is going to change the way they do business in the future. So, they demand not fixed networks, but to us, it could be a combination of, data networks. That's what we know as, the typical MPLS and, internet circuits. But as we go forward, our experience have, over the last 20 years, from whether you go from 2G to 3G to 4G, and in the future, 5, 6, things are going to change, right? Will 5G replace Wi-Fi at home? Will the home become the new, subdomain of an office, for example? These are the trends that we are watching. We remain agile, we remain flexible to make sure that, we hear our customers, and we will pursue the innovation that is necessary to, really look at every single customer. No one customer is the same now. We look at the industry, whether they are for manufacturing or whether they are using for automotive. The use case is just exploding as we speak at this stage. Yeah, I just want to offer my point of view there.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a great opportunity also for you to help those pop-up locations, save a lot of time on provisioning a fixed network and better serving your customers, going back to employee and customer experience and the reasons why we're doing digital transformation to begin with.
Absolutely. And Dustin, just to add, we are not just adding on, pop-up, connectivity. We are connecting it back to a platform, so that we can reuse that. We can build, micro, services. We can start, to customize, to the next customer. So I think that's where, the case has been taken on, right? How do we inject AI analytics, surrounding that, offer it at the cloud, offer it at the edge, so those are some of the discussions that's been going on.
And this is the best, in my opinion, but this is a great way to serve a large distributed estate, like retail, like banking, financial services. Right. So I completely agree on that. Hey, we're all a bunch of panelists agreeing with each other. It's great. So we can move, we're really good on time, by the way, but we can move gradually over to the next segment, which was, around transformation success stories and what's working. And I thought this would be good because we can get into the use cases and business outcomes. If we want to link IT to business outcomes, what are those outcomes? Do we have examples? You know, and it's kind of an open session. So if we want to move to the next slide, here are some of the key questions here. I had, you know, we heard about customer experience. I think Andrew, when we spoke, we talked about autonomous vehicles. Richard, when we spoke earlier, we talked about fail fast within safe environment and guardrails. So if I can maybe start with you, Andrew, and some of the things that you're seeing with regard to business outcomes and of digital transformation or success stories.
Okay, just let me quickly jump into one example. You know, we serve the automotive industry. You know, our success is really what the business owners as well as their consumers, you know, is going to perceive the service we provide, right? So one of the innovation that we came up with is how do we do predictive, 30 minutes in advance, network, prediction, which is the most stable network for automotive for the onboard, entertainment system that they have, right? So you don't want to go into the next network and you start to having, no downloads or whatever. The second part where, innovation that we have to do is how do we push software over the air, right? And we got to do it, as what Angus is saying, regulatory is one of the big, compliance that we need to, the data governance has to be strong. We have to clear that. But we are supposed to, work with this automotive provider that, had a dream, right? And his dream is to, how do I have, an application or entertainment or a video that is able to be, distributed across all the countries that I serve. And they want to do it, through the cloud. They want to, have software over the air. And with all the securities and, all the protection that we need to, provide as well. But, we did the innovation, agile development, and we came up with a solution, and, the customer is happily, is deploying as we speak. But those are the kind of, business success that we feel very proud of, after seeing that is being launched in one of their cars as well that they sold. So again, some of those things that we looked at providing that capability, across the 190 countries that we operate. How do we do it cross-stack? How do we do it, still within the confines, of the technology possibilities, right? So many other examples we've done, with media companies and with manufacturing, in IoT, for example. But those are some areas that, unless the customer is telling us they're successful, that the customer enjoys that experience, that omni-channel experience that, cannot be delivered, without, a strong network, right? I think that's where we are, or strong connectivity to that. Yeah.
Strong and consistent connectivity that delivers a user experience, probably behind the firewall, but wherever they sit to any form factor. I would say, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Angus, we talked a little bit around retail, and we know that you've seen some cool things in your career, but we know Lenovo has done some interesting things. Do you have any, not to put you too much on the spot, but do you have any great outcomes or success stories you can share with us?
I think this is probably some important perspective, like when we talk about all this transformation, or even right now we're talking about more digital transformation. For a lot of companies, I think how they see the technology, how they see the IT is really changing. It's like they're not only seeing IT as support service, there is a Skype sales service, it's a cost center. It's like that is really the old way at looking at IT. When we look at the success of all this transformation, actually is a lot of companies putting technology as the competitive advantages. And that is where we see is a major transformation in a lot of organizations. And no matter we talk about like Lululemon acquire a mirror company, and Walmart acquire a virtual fitting company, this really bring up a real ROI on the technology and transformation. And I think this is where we should look at it differently. Like how we measure traditionally, like, okay, on IT, not only the cost center is really helping the company to grow and evolve. And I think this is a very much important change that we see in this transformation, especially I think all this COVID impact, we see a lot of drive into more consumer engagement. How you're going to engage customer better, you're going to win. And that is where I think is an important measurement that we see in the market. A lot of our customers putting a lot of effort that to look at this area by bringing in technology as a core competence. I think this is very much important.
Right. And would you see not only bringing it in as a core competence, but making sure that it's across lines of businesses, very distributed? For example, your frontline, your customer service people, your marketing people who might be more data driven, and so on and so forth, operations. Would that Correct. Be a trend that you're seeing?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's where we see, even when we talk about a lot of COVID impact, like remember, we used to be in the office, right? I think most of us right now is work from home, right? And when we look at it from your internal support perspective, it's very different, right? You're no longer supporting people in the office. You're really doing remote support, even from IT perspective, right? And I think this is where we see the technology like what we're talking about. We need to enable that model that we can serve our employees even better, right? And that's where a lot of technology changes that need to be in place, a lot of device, a lot of new networking needs, security needs, that is really what we see our customer is investing into.
And interesting point you said about employees. We did some research on employee experience. We know that if you give them the right tools for the trade, they stay on longer, they churn the least, they're the most customer facing, and they generate the most revenue for the organization over time. We also find that people that are good employees, technology empowered, it's easier for them to win the talent war, to get other like-minded people to work for them. This is just some research we've done with the human resources persona. Looking at the bigger picture trends in the workplace. So it's some very interesting point of view.
Just on the back of that, Dustin, I do think that new ways of working, and I think networking and user teams have played a massive role in bringing that forward. Probably 2 or 3 years worth of strategy into months to make sure that people can use newer tools to collaborate, to connect with each other, to connect with customers, and keep working in the same or better ways than they were doing in the office previously. And I do think that the way that organizations now adopt ways of working will be a talent differentiator to attract better people in the future. That really resonates with me hugely. And I can see organizations that jump onto that approach versus those that don't will really start to see in 1 or 2 years' time a difference in the sort of talent that they are getting into their workforce.
Oh, we've seen recently a little high-tech rebellion around that, where workers being forced to come back into the office aren't feeling so good about it. And that says something about what the worker, what the employee, what the future workforce is going to look like.
And the future workforce is going to be multi-generational, more mobile, cloud native, younger. There's going to be, I don't know what the percentage is, 30% maybe now are millennials or something. I don't know, but there's probably a lot of things you're dealing with regard to digital natives versus maybe, Gen Ys and Gen X's and everybody else, baby boomers and so forth. Right?
Yes. One thing I think is different about some dynamics here in Asia Pacific and Japan is the existence of conglomerate organizations that include network infrastructure providers or operators, as well as multidisciplinary businesses. And we've seen some examples recently of where, those traditionally sat alongside each other, but they shared not much other than a holding company identity. Mm-hmm. We're now seeing a really active attempt to take the knowledge of new networking technologies and the knowledge of the network itself and transfer it through the business and start looking for use cases that leverage the advantage having these networking assets can give to the rest of the business. And that's something that's really started to happen. I've seen it happen more actively in the last 12 to 18 months than has previously been the case. And I think it is that drive that's come from the current emergency, but also a realization that, you know, if you're going to transform the other parts of your business, IT, networking, and connectivity are absolutely the DNA behind that transformation. So you need to transfer that skill set, which once upon a time existed within a small part of your organization, to a much larger group of people. And the challenge of, you know, it's another HR challenge, but how do you persuade people and encourage people to share that knowledge and information so that your application developers are aware of the network deployment that they're going to be part of, or that they're more cloud conscious? You've raised a question previously about skills and skills shortages. I think we are faced with the challenge that there's a gap in the industry. You know, we have quite a lot of people who've been around for a long time and have operated networks as a physical asset. And now we're asking those people to look at these as software environments, which are managed very differently, which move at a very different cadence. And sometimes I think let's say the discomfort that people feel at risk and change is driven more from their personal experience. You know, if you've been building physical copper or even optical networks, and someone comes to you and says that they're going to replace that with you know 5G last mile, and all of this is going to be driven by virtual or slice networks, that's complicated stuff and not something you necessarily feel comfortable with. So we really need to encourage and create more cross-domain knowledge and knowledge sharing to get the best of cloud expertise combined with networking expertise, because those two technologies are coming together quite quickly.
Well, there's a couple, that's interesting. There's a couple ways you can look at it. There's a Spotify model, I believe, called Tribes and Squads, Chapters and Guilds. It talks about horizontal leadership and multidisciplinary teams and going out and achieving missions with different sort of you're not reporting in a vertical construct, but you're kind of working more laterally and more horizontal, and you have very defined KPIs to bring this change. And it speaks to kind of like, you know, Agile and Scrum and software methodologies of yesterday with like tomorrow's or today's design thinking. And so there's a lot going on with like humanizing software, perhaps, Terence. I mean, you know, it's just a point of view. Or
I think that's that really the challenge. Again, the challenge, if you look at most networking organizations, you'll find, you know, the average age and skills background is it trends towards the more senior. As people have come into the IT industry, they've come into the software, they've come into the cloud side of the business, and there is something of a gap between those two. And again, we've seen some interesting cases here in Asia where companies are trying to bridge the two organizations and force the pace of change. I think often it starts with bringing the leadership together, having technology and information leadership in one, you know, under one hat. But it takes, as you say, it takes a change in philosophy, in how you drive projects and how you develop people in order to make that really change.
Richard, just real quick, I think ING Bank in the Netherlands was one of the examples I could think of in your industry that sort of did what Terence and I were talking about. Are you doing things to bring people and process together differently, doing things around encouraging multidisciplinary teams or multi-generational teams, or or fail fast environments, or hackathons. These kind of, I understand they're pretty active around Standard Chartered, but do you have maybe a few thoughts to comment on?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing all of the above, right?
Okay.
And I do remember speaking to some people from the banks in the Netherlands when I was in Barclays a few years back. And yeah, certainly Standard Chartered is exploring heavily with that approach, especially as we move to cloud networking and hosting and provisioning services differently, as Terence was saying, around provisioning network functions as software, not deploying switches, not racking things in data centers anymore. But how do you then think differently and solve problems differently? So it's a cultural change as well. So also, encouraging teams to adopt a fail fast, learn and move on culture. By creating sandboxes and guardrails for teams to work in, so that they can work safely, protecting what is production, but working outside of that to develop the new features and functionality, but not waiting behind the legacy operations modes of teams in the past to provision infrastructure for them. So previously that would take weeks and months to provision, compute, storage, networks, and all the things that go with that. But now people want to turn things on, immediately. So in a self-service kind of way. So absolutely, I think there's definitely parts of, when you're going through transformation, you've still got an old organization and old systems to continue with, and sometimes they don't lend themselves to that changing model. But I think, as your journey to cloud and your journey towards containerized services, microservices, you have to work in that way. And we're starting to see that be more heavily adopted in the bank. I do think we'll be in a transitionary period for a little bit of time, but it's definitely the trend is to go towards that tribe, squads type of model. People,
process, technology, data, and culture, something like that. Yeah. I think this ends I took lots of notes. I'm sorry, I'm supposed to be the moderator. I think this moves us to the round robin session, where, if it's okay, we will go to each of you. Maybe we'll start with Angus and just give us a couple takeaways of what you learned or what you have to say about this event, this panel.
Thanks, Destin. I think what I want to recap here is to everyone is really think back, start small now. No matter what we're talking about, today we talk a lot of networking, microservices, edge compute, all these things, which is, I think, is really the technology trend that all of the organization that you should look at. And you should have a visions to how the evolution should be. And I think Richard mentioned a lot of good things, what we see from a client perspective, a lot of legacy holding back. And but it's really important to think back and start now, so that you can evolve and very much get into what your customer need, and that is where how you can grow the business and the business, and that's where I see.
Yeah. Thank you, Terence.
So I would say that a word we haven't used a lot today or at all is ecosystem, but I think it's extremely important when we're looking at how this, how the IT world and how the creation of use cases and applications is going to evolve. It isn't a space where any one vendor or any one combination of vendors can solve business problems from the outside. So this DevOps model and the creation of solutions within a business as part of the value creation of that business, I think it's a change that so many different industries are going to go through. I think it started to a large extent with retail and web-based services, but as we look forward, it's going to move across all of the areas of business and industry. And the challenge, I think, is not the lack of use cases. there's tremendous imagination out there. People are identifying lots of things that they want to achieve. The challenge is finding monetizable steps along the way. And I take the example of self-driving vehicles. Everyone thinks of the consumer self-driving vehicle as that's the objective that many people want to get to, a lot of investments going on behind it. But there are, autonomous vehicles in so many other contexts, within a warehouse, within a port facility. Those are bounded environments where the complexity of the problem can be scaled down and where the technologies can be developed and improved and enhanced in a monetizable quantum before they progress to something else. And I think that's some of the thinking that we need in order to move forward, because when I look at some of the grander use cases, they require global deployment, they require nationwide deployment of technologies, and it's hard to reach that critical mass. So let's look at what are the smaller size steps that we can take and come together as ecosystems at a national, regional level to solve problems that are compelling for the community today, because there are lots of problems out there to be solved.
Thank you. And quickly, Richard, in 1 minute, what were some of the big takeaways for you? And then I'll move to Andrew.
Yeah, I don't have such a grand response that Terence had, although I did like that response immensely. I think, I've been in networking for 25 years. And I've never seen so much transformation or so much shift in the last 3, 4, 5 years than I did previously. Previously it was iterations of the same type of thing. They were, it was bigger, faster versions of ultimately what we refer to now as perhaps legacy. And I don't think there's ever been a more exciting time to work in networking, with the features and functions that are coming out now that can really deliver business differentiators to organizations. And quite often I feel we're trying to solve very similar problems. We are at this shift where we've got these on-prem data centers, we've got cloud, we're trying to do all these things across many different verticals. We're trying to solve similar problems at a networking level. And for me, it's just massively exciting. So having this conversation with you great people in different sectors just really brings that to the surface, that we are all in a very exciting and fast-paced field right now. And I think what we can do for our businesses as a underpinning network function is tremendous. So I'm looking forward to the future.
Great, thank you. And Andrew.
Yeah, I'm so glad I've been invited for this panel. And Terence on the ecosystem piece, definitely we're all learning from each industry, and the banking industry from Richard and so forth, right? And I think it's important that as we perceive the knowledge base through the future, AI will play a big part of it, right? So I think somewhat where you will try to neutralize between the Gen Z and the future the millenniums and the issue with people. Bottom line, data is key for us. How do we connect the data? How do we move the data? And how do we manage the data for now and for future? I think what we are trying to be as ready as possible is to make sure that we use technologies that is allowing the business case or the business users to reap their current satisfaction. I think that's key to us. I think I just want to end here by saying that if digitization is done right, someone mentioned this, a university lecturer said that if it's done right, it's like a caterpillar turning a butterfly. But if it's done wrongly, it's a caterpillar with many legs, right? I'm sure you heard this before, but it's meaningful. I've seen many organizations, very busy, and I'm very sure a lot of our fellow friends in IT world is trying to learn from each other, and I think that's where we should continue to have such sessions. Thank you so much, and I looking forward to contribute to the wider ecosystem of community here. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, panelists. I thought this was a great session, one of the best panels I've ever moderated, to be quite frank. Angus, Terence, Richard, and Andrew, it's been a great pleasure.